posted a video a couple of days ago highlighting my experience of attending Download Festival, and I had a comment fed back to me by Hotspur Hero, I'll put it on the screen just here, where they mentioned that their first ever gig that they had attended was actually the Monsters of Rock Festival, which was held before Download was established, and it was held on the exact same site that Download Festival currently occupies, that being Castle Donington Racetrack. So when I read that comment, it sparked interest with me, mainly because that same festival, that same day at Monsters of Rock, was also my first ever experience of a major festival. I was 15 years old at the time, and I attended the festival with a schoolmate. It was entirely mind-blowing to be there seeing the bands that would be featured on that day's lineup. And so I thought I would cover it in a little bit more detail, who played, what the festival was like, what it meant to me, and just the legacy of Monsters of Rock. So let's dive into it.
Hi there and welcome to MTV's coverage of Europe's most prestigious rock festival. Now tonight we are making our annual trek to Donington Monsters of Rock. Now for the first time in its 14-year history, Donington is being played out on two stages. The new talent stage provides a showcase for the Wild Hearts headliners Terrorvision, Skin, Biohazard, Cry of Love and Head Swim, while the main stage lines up with Pride and Glory, Therapy, Sepultura, Pantera, Extreme and the one and only headliners Aerosmith. 9 hours of the best music the world has to offer. We're going to cram maximum metal into every minute from Donington Monsters of Rock 94. This is Headbangers Ball.
My name is John. I've worked in the music industry for over 20 years as a DJ, as an artist, as a producer, and I've also been an avid gig goer. I've attended over 300 concerts in my time, and I've often kept memorabilia such as a t-shirt or a ticket stub, and so I thought, why not share some of that information here on my YouTube channel? So if you enjoy this kind of content, I would ask, hit subscribe, hit like, share a comment with me, and follow along as I dive into the archives of all of these ticket stubs and events and memorabilia that I've got to show you. So over the years, I have collected folders of every ticket stub of every event that I had available. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to dive in and have a little look at just each of the concerts that I've attended over the years and share a little bit of a thought attached to it. So let's talk about Donington Monsters of Rock Festival 1994. So first and foremost, here is the ticket stub from that day's event. Now back in 1994, Donington Monsters of Rock Festival was a single day event. However, on this year, this was the very first time that the organisers put on two stages. So two stages on the site for a single day festival, increasing the number of bands that would be available, having a main headline stage with the premium top artists, and offering a second stage to some of the more up-and-coming bands of that time. I look at the ticket now and I think it's £25. £25 to attend, and I can tell you that in the last video I've just attended Download Festival, which was my 10th event in total, including Monsters of Rock, my 9th Download Festival, and undoubtedly the most expensive. My Download ticket, although it included camping and a VIP experience, it was £2,250. It's a long way from the 25 quid of this time. And so one of the topics to cover here about this event was, how did I get there? Well, I had just been to see Metallica, Pantera, Sepultura and Biohazard some weeks ahead of this event coming around in 1994. And at that point, I spoke to my dad and I managed to convince him to let me to actually go to this festival with a schoolmate. And I can remember buying the ticket, which must have been about 8 or 9 months in advance, and going to a Virgin record store in Glasgow and standing outside for about 5 or 6 hours waiting to get in to be able to buy this ticket. It felt like a mission. There was no Ticketmaster, there was no online booking forms that you could go on to, there was no ordering it on an app. This was, you went to Virgin Records, you queued up and you bought your tickets for the event that you wanted to see. And so the next part of that was, well, how did we get from Glasgow to Donington, which is about a 5-hour drive. I was 15 at the time, I wasn't able to drive, and so luckily in the Sunday newspapers in Scotland, you used to see these small advertisements where you could book to go see a band and there would be a bus package available. And this was one of these trips. So from George Square in Glasgow, me and a friend waited and we got on a coach that took us from Glasgow Central all the way down to Donington. So it left in the middle of the night and arrived in the morning of the day of the festival. Now, one memory that sticks with me about the entry to this festival, sits in my mind, as me and my school buddy walked up to the gate ready to hand over this ticket, was the fact that Cadbury's were actually sponsoring the festival that day. And if you remember, the Boost bar was kind of like a Snickers bar, toffee, a bit caramel and a bit of a biscuit. The Boost bar had just launched and they were handing them out free of charge on the way in. Now, as a kid with very little money available to me on the day, I can remember grabbing handfuls of these Boost bars and shoving them into pockets to go in and eat in the festival later. Now, pause on that because I'll come back to that story later. So let's talk about the lineup. Who was playing? Who did I go to see at the festival that year? Well, I'm going to show just here the flyer from the actual Monsters of Rock event, and I can tell you that on the second stage they had the band Headswim, Cry of Love, Biohazard, Skin, TerraVision, and the headliners that day were the Wild Hearts. Now, over on the main stage, the big stage, kicking off the lineup that day was the band Pride and Glory, which actually was Zakk Wylde's first band. He had just parted ways with Ozzy and had decided to set up his own band and had been appointed to kick things off that Saturday afternoon.
Oh, minds and plot destruction! That's construction. Yeah.
I didn't know who Zakk Wylde was at that time. I didn't really know who Pride and Glory were, but I was to find that out much later when revisiting a Headbangers Ball episode on YouTube, which I'll include in the description, a link to that episode so that you can go check it out. But Pride and Glory kicked us off that day.
Death and hatred to mankind. Yeah! Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh Lord, yeah!
Now, next up on the lineup on the main stage was a band that I was keen to see. I had recently just bought their album and I'd been to see them just a matter of months before at a Glasgow gig, and that was the Irish rockers and legends Therapy. This album, Troublegum, which is probably to me the all-encompassing Therapy album, had just been released and the band were touring with this record. So when they played on the main stage, it was definitely where me and my buddy had to head to. So we walked down, we got our position, we locked arms as the crowd waited for the band to take the stage, and as they kicked off into their first track, the surge that we felt as we locked arms as two 15-year-olds felt overwhelming in the crowd. This was the festival introduction that we had been waiting months and months to be part of. One part that I can remember about the Therapy performance in particular was they played Singing in the Rain as the rain came on and just slowly soaked us. And what I can remember visually about that point was just the steam coming off the crowd from the sweat of mainly male bodies at that point in a mosh pit, just going insane to this band. And as the heat rose, the steam was coming off of us, off of our t-shirts from the sweat, and I can just visually remember that moment just hearing the band play "We're Singing in the Rain," it sticks with me, it lives with me. Next up on the lineup that day, a band that I had already been to see at the Barrowlands and knew full well how important they were to the scene. That band had just released what is considered one of the greatest metal albums of the 90s, and that is Sepultura and the album Chaos AD. Now, I had seen the band in 1993 at the Barrowlands and I was in love with Max Cavalera, his brother Igor, and just the performances that the band were putting out. I had a VHS videotape of them playing live in Brazil that I was obsessed with as a kid. And so the chance to see this band again in such a huge crowd was just there for me. So we were right at the front going crazy, and as Max walked out onto the stage and they kicked off the show, it was mind blowing to your 15-year-old. Just mind blowing. One part that I can remember about that show was watching Phil Anselmo standing at the side of the stage from Pantera, watching Sepultura, just seeing this new Brazilian band. I say new to the kind of UK scene at this point. They had thoroughly broke out of the Brazilian scene and were now spreading across Europe thanks to the push of Roadrunner Records. And a real highlight of the Sepultura set right towards the end was them covering the track Orgasmatron by Motorhead.
I want to thank you all for coming. It was fucking great, man. We thank you for the support. I am the one, Orgasmatron!
That later became a B-side of a single that Sepultura put out. So they included the Orgasmatron live from Donington in a CD release, which I also have in my collection. So it's kind of cool to know that I was in the crowd during that performance, which later went on to being a release. Now the second stage proved to be quite controversial. A band that featured there broke all of the headlines and were featured on MTV for some of the wrong reasons. That band, Biohazard. Now at the time, I had also deeply fallen in love with this New York style hardcore rap metal infusion that was starting to come through in the music, and Biohazard were one of those bands that were leading the way. They had just played the Cat House in Scotland some nights before, and I was there to see Biohazard and Dog Eat Dog perform. It was the first time I was ever in the Cat House, and I can remember as Biohazard were on, I surged to the front and guitarist Billy reached down and grabbed me by the hand and pulled me on the stage. I had no idea what was happening. I was 15 years old and I'm on the stage with an idol of mine, and he's inviting me now to stage dive. And so he handed me this plectrum and I dived off the stage into the crowd. I was there with 3 friends, one who would go on to the Monsters of Rock festival with me, and 2 girls that I went to school with in my class. And I can just remember that moment so vividly, how how awestruck I was diving off a stage at the Cat House. To give you an idea how close these gigs were, this was on the 1st of June, and this, as you can see here, is on the 4th of June. So just a handful of days later, I had gone from seeing Biohazard in Glasgow to now seeing them at Monsters of Rock at Donington. So the question is, what was the controversy?
That's our goal, and all these dudes are gonna help us out right
Don't
here.
even ask us. Yo, you guys get up on the stage? You get up on the stage? These guys will be up there, you see. Check it out.
Well, Biohazard were a band that openly encouraged stage diving. And so during their performance at Monsters of Rock Festival on the newly crowned second stage, Biohazard invited the audience onto the stage. I'm there with my buddy and we're watching the chaos go on. I'm watching people clamber over the barriers and climb up onto the stage as the band perform. But it wasn't to last long. The band were eventually cut off from sound. The music turned off, the lights turned off, and the band left with nothing but just silence on the stage and like 50 people surrounding them. I remember this clip coming out of the band appearing at Dynamo Festival later that day and reflecting back on the performance from Monsters of Rock and criticising the organisers for stopping the show. I would think at this point though, it's fair to say safety kicked in.
We were just on stage here at Monsters of Rock, Castle Donington. It's supposed to be some big rock concert where people are supposed to have fun and have a good time. And some kids wanted to come up and stage dive. Chaos! Biohazard chaos ensues. Therefore, we won't say who they are. The people in charge seem to have panicked and cut the power on us.
And this was the album that changed everything for me when it came to Biohazard. This is Urban Discipline, which featured the tracks Punishment and Shades of Grey, which at the time were being heavily pushed by MTV. So to have these guys in the UK, to be able to go see them, and then just days later check them out at Monsters of Rock Festival, felt like a big deal to me as a 15-year-old. Now Biohazard were actually reformed and back in the UK in 2024, and they were given a slot at Download Festival. So I was right at the barrier and I was able to just relive those moments again. 1994 and 2024 all over again. And as I stood there and as the band finished, I was over the moon to be handed the set list by Billy in the band. And then the other guys came round and I actually managed to get a couple of them to sign it for me. So this is the set list from 2024, all those years later, 30 years later. And as the band were finishing their performance, they were talking on stage about the 1994 incident of them being kicked off stage and asking if anybody was there. And I had my hand up like, yeah. And this is why I got this. And they came down and they actually spoke to me. And we just talked briefly, like the 2024 performance had really just put a nail in the coffin of the 1994 incident, because it was a performance that just blew the festival apart for me. I had such a good time. So thank you for this to Biohazard. Going to see Pantera in 1993 at the Barrowlands, and then being able to go see them make the main stage of Monsters of Rock Festival in 1994, that was the band that I was there to see that day. As I look around my record collection, it's fair to say that these two had a huge influence on me. The Vulgar Display of Power album, which was so heavily rotated on MTV at the time, Headbangers Ball, often featured Walk. And then, of course, the absolute classic Far Beyond Driven had just been released ahead of the Monsters of Rock Festival. So as the band took the stage, I was in that pit and ready to mosh.
The song is called Slaughtered!
Now this is where the story starts to get a little bit weird, because having had Pride and Glory, Therapy, Sepultura, Pantera on the main stage, the next act was to carry the duties of managing and warming up for the headliner. And that band that day was Extreme. Now this was a band that I cared nothing for. I was not there to see Extreme. I just wanted them to be off as quickly as possible so that the headliners could take the stage. But one funny moment that I remember was those boost bars. Now, everybody in the crowd that had kept a boost bar that day took it out of their pocket and started throwing it at the band Extreme. And I can just remember the guitarist like dodging chocolate bars as they got launched onto the main stage. But it wasn't Extreme for me that day. And lastly, the headliners, Aerosmith. Now, again, I think it's fair to say I was there that day to see bands like Biohazard, Pantera, Sepultura. I was on the heavier side of the metal music that was being featured that day at Monsters of Rock. Aerosmith had just come out the back of some massive albums and big releases, particularly heavily featured on MTV, and so I could respect them as a legacy artist. I enjoyed the rest of the show, but it was fair to say my day was fairly heavily loaded towards the front end and more of the warm-up bands than the headliners.
Donington, welcome to Siberia. We're going to rock your asses off if you can thaw them out.
Wake up, kids! Head pass, and you don't think nothing really changing with the tapes. You a grand slammer, but you know Babe Ruth. You gotta lie to how to relate.
So that was the summary of just attending Monsters of Rock Festival in 1994. Were you there that day? Did you attend that festival? Did you take part in visiting both the stages? Let me know down in the comments who was your favourite artist that day. Take a trip down memory lane with me. And if you like this content, I would ask you to hit subscribe, hit like, and leave me a little note down below if there's anything you want to comment on this particular content. And in the next video, I'll pick another concert and we'll dive a little bit further into it. In the meantime, if you want to check out any of these performances on YouTube, links are in the descriptions down below where you can go and watch them. Thank you so much for watching with me, taking that trip down memory lane, and we'll see you in the next video.